Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. They were checking their records and they found that I did in fact speak at this conference, and it was the year they had just discovered pi. And it was, it was a big party and celebration, and in fact now they celebrate every March 14th, as you know, is Pi Day, and that all started here, so what can we say? All right, this presentation title, From the Campfire to the Holodeck, is amazingly similar to the title of my new book, From the Campfire to the Holodeck, which talks about the role of place in education, and that's going to be our theme today. And when we talk about place, I mean it both in a metaphorical sense and also in a physical sense. But let's start with some realities that, about schooling that are commonplace to many kids. A lot of kids think that school sucks. And years ago, I used to say that the reason for that was because schools, prisons, and mental hospitals were the only three places in society where if you didn't go, someone came and got you. Okay? It turns out, doing further research, that that's not true. Well, that part is true, but the problem with education goes way back before that. This is a painting of a University of Bologna classroom in 1350. I draw attention to the gentleman in the third row at the end who is sound asleep. You'll see several students talking with each other, some other people nodding off, and there's one goody two-shoes in the front row who's actually paying attention, and the teacher just drones on as if nothing's going on. So the fact is that school not only sucks, but it has sucked since 1350. And we've known this. We've known that it didn't work for that long, and yet, if you take a look at classrooms, I went to school in well, it wasn't an all-girls school, obviously, but I went to a school that had these kinds of desks and chairs, all right? And you know, the reason those chairs and desks were bolted to the floor was because the people who manufacture brooms have a broom exactly the width so that the janitors could go through and sweep those floors very quickly. That is what determined the spaces between those desks in the classrooms. See, when you start researching this stuff, it really is annoying. Now, how many of you know about Second Life? Anybody ever go to Second Life and prowl around? In Second Life, you can move by teleportation. You can build anything you want. So I went to Second Life and I did a random search on classrooms. Now, why would anybody design a classroom in Second Life that looks just like a classroom in this life? Right? That's bizarre. But there it is, and I invite you to take a look at it. And I think part of the problem is that the people who designed schools were people who did well in those old environments. So for them, hey, it worked. And the people it didn't work for, well, they're learning disabled. Well, maybe it's not true, all right? And teachers are faced with trying to motivate and inspire young people in an environment that is antithetical to it in many cases. And they have no control over that environment, although we're going to argue that maybe they can a little bit. For example, this is a school in Brazil that we did some work with. My wife, Norma, became principal of the school for a while. It was in transition. And the classrooms had risers in the front, much like this. They're made out of cement, so that the teacher, who already is taller than the students anyway, was much taller than the students, because that connotes authority, right? Much like, if you remember that painting from what year? 1350. The teacher is at a riser, okay? A position of authority. So what we did is we got jackhammers. Well, we had people bring in jackhammers and get rid of those risers and, you know, fix the rooms up to make them a little more humane and to change those learning spaces. Now, lots of folks who are technology enthusiasts, like everybody in this room, and myself included, say, well, you know what? Technology can solve the problems. And I'm all for that, accepting that sometimes we use technology to do the wrong things. Okay? Let me give you an example. The interactive whiteboard. Everybody has gone nuts over the interactive whiteboard, it seems, right? But look at how this is being used. Again, continued support for full frontal model of education, where the teacher is in the front and talking to the kids, and the difference is that instead of using a $200 whiteboard, they're using a $2,000 whiteboard, and the only thing that's really changed is the electric bill. I mean, pedagogically, the model has stayed the same. It hasn't shifted. Now, you can use these devices in some very different ways, and we'll show something about that later on in this presentation. But for now, whoa, we got some things to think about. Now, my thinking in all this goes back quite a few years. I had the honor of consulting for the White House back during the Clinton administration. I was assigned to Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is in the old executive office building right next to the White House that you see in all the pictures. And at that time, Bonnie was involved with the White House on the National Information Infrastructure Initiative, as I recall, and whatnot. And they had a meeting that they put together on future stuff in relating to education that was sponsored by the National Academy of Sciences, which is a fantastic facility and whatnot. And this meeting was, the speakers were all what I call picture cards, all right? I mean, we had Arthur C. Clarke presenting live by video from Sri Lanka. We had another presenter who was speaking with video from the Great Wall of China, I forget his name, Mitch Kapoor. We had several senators, we had other people. We had two science fiction authors, because science fiction people often have very good insights about, you know, the reasonable future. I'm talking science fiction, not fantasy, because there's two different, no, because there's two different classes of literature there really are. But they had William Gibson, the guy who coined the word cyberspace, and Bruce Sterling as speakers. And it was like that for the whole day, actually for 2 days. And so I thought, man, I'm not leaving that room. And so I showed up with a bunch of cassette tapes, which tells you how long ago that was, and sat myself in the front row and was ready to go. I wanted to just bring it all in. Well, they hadn't scheduled any breaks excepting lunch and dinner. So after a couple of hours, people got up to leave the room, and they would go out, use the facilities, but then instead of coming back in, they'd be standing in the hall talking to each other about what they'd heard. And I thought, that's interesting. And that night, I found myself sitting in my room just meditating, contemplating on all the stuff. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just needed to internalize all the stuff that I had learned about that day. And it occurred to me that what I was witnessing is that human beings occupy 3 learning spaces. The campfire, that's the home of a presentation, that's what you're getting from me right now. The watering hole, which is the social learning case, that's the people standing in the halls. And the cave, which is the reflective space, which is what was going on back in the hotel rooms at night. Well, at least my room, probably others as well. And I got back to California, where I lived at the time, and took a good friend of mine out to lunch, Prasad Kaipa, and talked to him about this, and he said, you're missing a space The fourth space is life, which is the application space. And so I thought, that's interesting, because the campfire is the didactic space, the watering hole is the social constructivism space, think Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, all that good stuff. The cave is Piaget's constructivist space, the cognitive constructivism, and life is Seymour Papert's constructionism, as opposed to constructivism. Constructionism, where you actually build something. And as Seymour used to say, it doesn't matter if it's a sandcastle or a poem, you have some expression external from yourself that demonstrates your knowledge. Now, here's the thing. This is probably wired into our DNA somehow. Human beings have always occupied these learning spaces. And they move between them at their own paces. Just like those people, they couldn't take any more lectures, so they had to go in the hall and talk, because that's what they needed as learners. As learners, that was important to them. Okay? So I thought, man, that's neat. So I wrote a book called Campfires in Cyberspace, and that was over a decade ago. And then this new book's a complete rewrite of all that stuff. But as I said, the campfire is the didactic space, and it has existed since the beginning. And we will always need, did the lights just flash, or did I have a stroke? The lights flashed, okay, thank you. Anyway, the campfire is the didactic space. The watering hole is the social learning space. That's where you find out what's going on in your village and the village next to you and whatnot. You learn from your peers. And here's an example of a watering hole space. This was taken, picture at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center when I was there in the 70s. We had these rooms, we had some rooms that just had a bunch of beanbag chairs in them. And anybody who wanted to could just come in and have little meetings, and just sit around and chat. The fellow at the lower left is Tim Mott. He started Electronic Arts. I mean, these were some pretty good people here. So these types of learning spaces, some people knew it without knowing it, that they had to create these spaces in a research environment, not in a classroom, but in a research environment at least. Going to a school setting, one of my clients is the Illinois Math and Science Academy in Aurora, Illinois, and this is one of their watering hole spaces, which is set up just in the middle of the building, and kids just go and sit and talk with each other. By the way, as conversation theory demonstrates, conversations, no matter how many it starts out with, ultimately it goes down to two people. One person talking to another. If you see one person talking to 15 people, they're telling a joke. Right? That's typical. That's an overstatement, but we don't have time. So but that's an example of a watering hole inside a school. The cave, reflective space, very important. And this is a photograph of a school in Poughkeepsie. It was designed by, Fielding Nair Architects. And this building was an existing structure that they just gutted the interior and completely redid it. And this particular cylindrical structure is right in the middle of a room. And if kids just need to go reflect, they just climb inside. And they have this sort of built in, which I think is so neat. I think it is so neat to have that right in the room. Tinkering spaces, that's a big topic. I mean, this morning's keynote, which I thought was splendid about the whole maker revolution, and it is a revolution. He was absolutely correct when he talked about that. We're starting to see maker spaces showing up in schools, and that's the constructionist side of things. That's where you build stuff. There's a school in San Francisco that focuses almost entirely on that. If traditional schools focus too much on lectures, this one focuses almost too much on building stuff. It's called the Tinkering School. And they also have these camps that they do around the country, Chicago, other places. And the rule about these environments is you may cut yourself, you may need Band-Aids, but you won't need stitches. And at least that's what they try to avoid anyway. So in our workshops, what we like to do on this topic is to ask teachers to design their ideal classroom. If they could have any classroom in the world, what would it look like? Good question, right? And this is a design that was sketched out by someone in Michigan City, Indiana, who was a reading resource teacher. And what she wanted was some egg chairs, that's on the left side, hanging from the ceiling for kids who needed to be cocooned, and then they could read inside these little mini caves, right? Kind of neat. She wanted a tumbling mat in the middle of the floor with some nice pillows for kids who wanted to, lie down, stretch out. She had tables with computers and bookcases. She wanted a fireplace in her room because it does get cold there in the winter, or as we like to call it, March. And then for herself, she wanted a loft where she could work with kids one-on-one without drawing undue attention to them. So when she did this diagram, the next day, I brought in my IKEA catalog, and I said, take a look through here. And she said, they've got everything I want. And I said, how's the pricing work out? She says, well, it's a lot less than the furniture that I've got costs. I said, okay, so you could get the classroom you wanted and spend less money, accepting that somebody already bought your furniture and you've got it. But the fact is that these are conscious decisions that somebody made, and the people who make those decisions need to be thinking about these sorts of things. And I think we as teacher educators need to do it. I teach at Walden University in the doctoral program, and this is a topic we talk about all the time, the role of place in education and thinking about that. So that's, that's that. And this is just a website talking about some of the architects who are using this. We're seeing schools based on these learning spaces all over the world. There's a school in Melbourne, Australia, that's doing a brilliant job in all of this stuff. Singapore, oh God. Very few in the US, as it turns out, but we almost got a client in Brazil, which would have made sense since I'm there so much, but that didn't happen yet, but it might happen. Now we bring in technology. And when we talk about technology, my position is that if we learned around the campfire, now that the campfire has turned into the glow of a monitor, we need to be sure that the stories told around this new screen are as powerful as the ones told around the old fire, right? Because lectures have a place. The storytellers are revered in societies, and we need our storytellers. We very much need them. Now, our modern storytellers, for many of us, include places like TED. You go to the TED site, and you can download astounding presentations. How many of you use TED Talks in your teacher education stuff? Okay, I do too. I have my students go there all the time and critique some of the speeches and take a look at stuff. It's a terrific resource, and they post new things almost every day. Now, lots of talk these days about flipped classrooms, right? How many of you are very familiar with that term? Okay. All right. We'll let the title of this slide speak for itself. I took the flipping off the flipped classroom from this slide? Well, I mean, here, look, here's the thing. If you take a look at Salman Khan's stuff, all right, what he has done is he's taken lectures that don't work in a classroom and he's put them on video so that they won't work at home. I'm sorry, he's not changing anything from a pedagogical perspective. The guy is a stockbroker, hello, he doesn't know anything about education. I mean, wasn't that as a commodities trader or something? Yeah, I mean, geez, no, I'm sorry. So what we did was we created videos that are inquiry starters to get kids involved in inquiry-driven project-based learning. And these are very short video clips, 2 minutes long. And the function of them is to give just enough information to trigger a project that students then go off and research and produce results for, which could take anywhere from a week to, in some cases, a semester, okay? What we did these as a Google app, and so if you go to the Chrome Web Store, you can download this for free, and runs on your Chrome browser perfectly. And if you don't like the Chrome browser for some reason, and you still want to use it, I'll send you another link online that will give you the same content. Just email me for that. But so this is a way of flipping things around a little bit, because what we found in project-based learning is that the difficult part for a lot of educators is how they pose the driving question. How do you decide what question is worth spending time on? That's a teachable skill, but it takes time to do that, and while they're learning how to do that, why not help them? So we did 50 of these things across the curriculum, everything from history to social studies to science and math and whatnot. And they're, you know, I think they're kind of interesting. On the social side of things, how many of you use Google Hangout? Okay, I think it's brilliant, you know. Do video conferencing worldwide for free with groups of people. You know, what's wrong with that picture? Pretty neat. Then, if we get into the cave, the introspective stuff, I think one of the powerful ways to do that is for kids to be involved with programming. And this Seymour Papert used to talk about this a whole lot. And one of the cool things to program, okay, I don't need that call. That's from Brazil. And it's not even for me. The thing about this is the Arduino board. It's about 30 bucks. And you plug this into the USB port on your computer, and from this you can run motors, LED lights. This is a controller for robotic projects of all kinds. There are even some commercial 3D printers that use this board to run the software for the printer. And MIT developed the Scratch programming language. How many of you are familiar with Scratch? Okay, lots of people. This is a version called Scratch for Arduino, S4A, and it's just like Scratch, but it has some Arduino commands. And so kids could sit down, program this, and have the Arduino board send messages to their robots and do all kinds of cool things. And in some sense, that's also getting into the world of actually building stuff, but it's also in the cave time, you know, the thinking process. This is a water purification system that uses recycled materials. We're a big fan in Brazil of using recycled materials because Legos are so bloody expensive. And also, problem with Legos is that after you've built something, your reward is you get to take it apart. Well, what fun is that? You know, but if you build something out of recycled materials and maybe you got $3 worth of motors in it or something, well, you keep it. You know, you don't keep the controller necessarily, but you keep the rest of it. It's a memento, all right? So this is a water purification system that actually works. That's all driven by an Arduino. and done by these high school students. In the world of building, you heard about it this morning, 3D printing, it is the next big thing for all the reasons that we were told. I mean, geez, Mr. Liscombe really nailed it, really nailed it. And for example, Nautilus gears, all right? These actually work, you know, and it's not intuitive, you know, you might say, oh, that could never work. But it does work. And once kids start playing with their own gear designs, they'll discover that there's an amazing variety of gears. There's almost no limit to the kinds of gears that work and mesh at all times, of all kinds of shapes. And they can build their own, experiment using 3D printers. Very powerful tool. But I still wasn't happy. You know, we got some schools making some progress. We started doing things, but I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a learning space that encompassed all 4 Campfire, Watering Hole, Cave, and Life at the same time around some exciting project, okay? And the goal was to look for interaction and immersion. So I did some research on that. First place I went to is Disney, because they know a lot about this, right? This is a mission to space program that they've got at the Epcot Center in Florida. And basically, it's a simulator. You go in, 4 people, and you have to take off this rocket, and you land it someplace, and you have to fly and land it without dying. And you have all these controls, and these controls actually do stuff, and each person, each of the 4 people has different responsibilities in this mission. And I have to tell you that when this thing tilts back and you're looking straight up and it takes off, you feel like you're taking off. In fact, you haven't moved 6 feet the whole trip because of the way these simulators work, but it sure feels like it. So we had 2 friends from Brazil, my wife Norma and myself, and I said, well, let's do that. By the way, they have 2 lines. Have any of you been to this exhibit? Have you seen this? Okay, they have 2 lines at this exhibit. One of them is, if you even know someone with heart problems, take the other line. Okay, so I took the heart problem line because I do have a heart problem, and after this trip, I wondered what that other one was like because, whoa. So anyway, Norma said, I'll just meet you in the gift shop afterwards. And so it was Hinato, Jules, and myself sitting in this, which meant that one of us, and that means me, had to push 2 sets of buttons at the same time because I had to fill in for the missing person. And it's very, very hard to land a spacecraft when the person next to you is screaming, we are all going to die. And so we almost missed. We landed and the front started to tip off the edge, and then this voice came on and said, don't move. And we didn't. And then you hear the sound of something snapping to the back and towing us back to a safe. So that was it. And I thought, that's neat, but these things cost a few $1 million and only handles a few kids at a time. Not good for a classroom. And the missions are very short, 15 minutes, okay? Maybe even less than that. Google did this experiment that they showed at one of the TED conferences a couple of years back. This is called Liquid Galaxy. They took 8 flat panel displays, mounted them vertically, and built this thing. You could get about 8 people in there, and they've got a special version of Google Earth, so it's seamless. It's like in the Atrium Hotel elevators, you know, that you can look around, except you can go anywhere on the planet with this, and they've got a 3-dimensional joystick system that you use. They've got all these screens, the 3D joystick, 8 computers, and 2 of those little bags that they have in airplane seats. Because it turns out that if you are suddenly flipping off at some side angle, some people just don't handle that really well. So we sort of kept that in mind in our own design that we'll get to later, how to avoid that problem. This only handles 8 people, so not good for a classroom. So I thought, you know what I want? I want a holodeck. And I'm not a Trekkie, because I can't do that finger thing, you know. So good for you, man. All right, see, I can't do that. So I'm not a Trekkie. But the holodeck is an interesting concept, because basically it's an empty room until you turn on the computers, and then it becomes anything: a Victorian drawing room, a seagoing vessel, you know, whatever, okay? Well, we can't make furniture with computer images yet, but I can do the rest of it with computers. So what we did is, we said, let's build a holodeck to incorporate all 4 learning spaces. And I had a school that gave me a room, and on one wall we had 3 projectors, and the wall was about 10 meters across, and so that was the viewport out the front. Then we had lighting on the sides of the walls, and then we had those whiteboard I was telling you about. That was our control panel, okay? And I'll tell you what we did with that. But the characteristic of the holodeck: it's immersive, interactive, interdisciplinary, innovative, and interesting, and this all leads to engagement, and that's what we want for our kids. So the sample driving question for our first mission was, how can you tell if something is or was alive? That's an interesting question. Let's raise the ante a little bit. On Mars. Okay? So we start with a brief setup. That's like those videos that we did 50 of. This one happens to be 5 minutes long, but it basically sets up the problem, because if the kids don't know what it is expected of them, they don't know what to research. And the kids form their own teams, because if they're going on a space voyage to Mars, they say, well, what do you need? You know, well, we're going to need a medical crew. We're going to need geologists. We're going to need biologists. We're going to need engineers. You know, these different things. And so they have to go research all of that. And I said, well, let's take a look at the scenario. Here's why we've got the mission. Back turn of the century, Percival Lowell, using his telescope, saw what he thought were canals on the surface of Mars. By the way, we now think that what he was looking at was the vein structure of his own eyeballs because of the optics of his telescope. Okay, and that happens, by the way, sometimes if you have a microscope and you see these structures, it's your own eye that you're looking at. So, but as far as he was concerned, those were canals. And hey, we got War of the Worlds, pretty good novel out of it, so what the heck. But that was that. Then we fast forward to the Allen Hills meteorite, which was found some years back in Antarctica in the region called Allen Hills. Nobody's creative on names. They just take, oh, it's the Allen Hills meteorite. It's where it came from. And you take that apart and take a look inside, and you see what appears to be fossilized little critters. These are, if these in fact were critters, they were nanobacilli, and they're just about the right size compared to the ones that we know here on Earth. The difference is those are 300 million years old, and they came from Mars. Now, the scientists have been back and forth as to whether or not this is real. They're now starting to think more and more that it is real. Then, of course, you know, we have the robots up there, and they're scraping, and they found ice on Mars, and that Mars had salt, right? Which means at one time Mars had margaritas. You know, got to think this through, but you see what I'm saying, okay? Something going on Mars. 2 summers ago, Martian years are about twice Earth years. 2 Martian years ago, there was a huge methane release that was found in the northern hemisphere in the summertime, 16,000 metric tons of methane. Any idea how many cows it takes to produce 16,000 metric tons of methane? It's a lot, okay? And this is Olympus Mons, which is the largest known mountain in the solar system. At the base of it, there's ice, and when that ice melts, there was some seepage that came out. Now, some people think that this was an instrumentation problem, not because it was really methane. So you see, the scientists can't agree, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's not, so that's why we got to have a mission. We got to go check this out. So we said, okay, here's your ship. We're going to call this the Beagle, sort of in honor of the ship that Darwin borrowed for his journeys. And it's a toroidal spacecraft that spins at 3 RPM so that the gravitational force that's created through angular momentum is exactly the same as that on Earth, which helps the students understand why they're not bouncing around inside the ship, okay? And all of this happens before they go into the holodeck. Because when they get into the holodeck, they feel like they're going on board a spacecraft. So before starting, they determine what skills are needed, they form teams, they research their topics, and then we have an instruction manual for the spacecraft itself on the iPad, and they can go in, click on different parts of the ship and see what different things do, what the living quarters look like, and all that kind of stuff. And the ship takes off, and before it leaves, before it gets too far out in space, all of a sudden, the lights on the walls turn red, sirens go off, and there's a flashing notice on the screen that says there's been a breach. And what's happened is a meteorite has punctured a hole in the outside of the spacecraft, and you're losing oxygen. This photograph happens to be of a real meteorite hole inside one of the space shuttles. Okay, so we keep the physics accurate, excepting for the speed of light, you know, because otherwise the mission would take too long. So we had to kind of speed that part up. So the kids have to design a plug to plug that hole before they run out of oxygen. And by the way, it's possible for everybody to die in this mission. Because if you don't have that risk, it's not real. It's like a video game, you know? I mean, you lose sometimes. And what do? You pick yourself up and you try it again. So using SketchUp or some other tools, kids design plugs. They critique the one that they think is going to meet their needs the best, and they describe how it's going to work. And then using a 3D printer, they build it. And then I take it out. I take it back to be put into the hole, and all of a sudden the alarms go off, and oxygen levels back up, and everybody's happy, and the mission continues. Now, I gave a speech on this topic at the International Space Development Conference in Chicago a few years back, and there were some people in the audience who were looking at that idea of 3D printers in space, and they said, you know, this is good, because spacecraft, you don't know what spare parts you're going to need. You just don't. And so they created a company called Made in Space, and that machine behind this guy here is actually a 3D printer that's going up to the space station this year, okay? And I'm so tickled, because we're just doing fictional stuff, and somebody said, hey, that could be real. And it turns out that having a 3D printer on the space station is very tricky, because you don't have Earth's gravitational pull. It's a microgravity environment, but works pretty well. This picture was taken in what is lovingly known as the Vomit Comet. That's the airplane that does the hyperbolic or parabolic stuff. And no, I'm not interested in ever riding in that. This is just a random shot of kids during the mission. The boy in the yellow shirt, I asked the teacher how long he could stay in the project, and she said, as far as I'm concerned, till he graduates. And so I said, okay. He was no problem for us at all. he just, man, he was on task all the time, on task all the time. The kid in front of him has decided he wants to become an astronaut. This is interesting kind of stuff. This is a broader picture. Here you can see our view screen in the front, looking in this case at Brazil. On the left side, you see the panel that has some other images on it. Here, that interactive whiteboard is being used as the controller. So when you need to go someplace, then you just click on some button on that, and then the displays in the front of the room change. And I think that's kind of cool. That took a while to write all that software, but you know, it's only hard once. Anyway, they get to Mars. And I had a hidden agenda one time. How many of you have ever had hidden agendas in your teaching? Anybody ever do that? They're a bad thing, aren't they? Because they never work out. My hidden agenda was I wanted these kids to learn something about magnetism, because the Van Allen belt protects the Earth from a lot of crud, okay? But there's no Van Allen belt around Mars. And so all of a sudden, their screen gets a video message in it from NOAA, because NOAA on Earth also does the space weather reports. I don't know if you knew that. And we took a script of one of their weather reports and had it read, and we added one line only, and that is, attention all spacecraft in the area. And the rest of it is about the huge galactic, storm, particulate storm from the sun, traveling 1 million kilometers per hour, and that they had to protect themselves because it would damage things. And all it did in the U.S. On Earth was knock out cell phones for 5-10 minutes, which is nothing. So I thought, well, this is a chance for the kids to design a magnetic deflection system. And this one kid said, you know what? If we can see Mars, that means the sun is shining on Mars, which means we are between Mars and the sun. What if we move around to the backside of the dark side of Mars and wait the storm out? Okay? So how many of you know about things called Lagrange points? Ever heard of those? Those are the stable points where you can put things and they don't go away. And there's one right behind Mars, kind of a convenient place to hang out. So we moved the ship around the backside of Mars. And I moved it too far at first so I could still see a little bit of the sun. And the kids are saying, no, 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 move it back, move it back. So we get back, and the whole room at that point is dark. And all of a sudden they hear the detectors going off from the radiation detectors that we dropped them in the orbits of Mars so that we could pay attention to what's going on. And this one young lady got up to sit down with a friend of hers. And I went over to her and I said, sweetie, are you okay? She said, I'm scared. And I thought, yes, oh, this was immersive, this was interactive, total suspension of disbelief. Total suspension of disbelief. So, the storm passes, everybody's happy, and they had to then decide if they're going to go send a shuttlecraft down to the surface of Mars, pick up samples and bring them back, or are they going to go down personally and examine? And there's huge debates because the medical teams say, if you go down and you bring something back to this ship and there is a live bacterium in it, the chance I've got an antibiotic that'll knock it out is pretty close to 0. So they have these arguments, just like real scientists, which is so cool. This picture was taken a year later of some kids who had come in, who had been in the program the first time, and they came back into this room. And they had an iPad. They were sitting there looking at a map of Mars, and then they're identifying stuff on the screen. And so I went over to them and I said, what are you doing? And they said, well, you know, we're taking a look at Mars and our map. And I said, well, where's Mars? And he said, it's right out the window. It's right there. I said, okay. Again, the suspension of disbelief. It's very powerful. And unless you've been in one of these things, it's almost impossible to describe how real it seems. So the robotics team has to design and build, if they decide to do robot manipulators to bring samples back, they have to build something that could be sent to the surface of Mars and do their stuff, and then they draw their conclusion based on the samples that they've analyzed, and they come back, stop off at the space station for trade movies and get something cold to drink before they head back home. So strangest thing for me in that environment is turning it off. And when I turn it off, it goes back to being a room again. And it is very disequilibrating. Very disequilibrating. Which means that I guess we were successful. I mean, the goal was to create this really interactive, immersive environment. And we did this with about $5,000. Okay? This is assuming you got a few computers lying around that you can, they don't have to be devoted full time to this. And I wouldn't use projectors in the future. That's why the room had to be as dark as it was. I'd use, because you can get these 60-inch LCD screens for $700 now, and put a bunch of them together. Whoa, that looks real nice, okay? Now your price is going to go up a little bit, but not that much, not that much. The tricky part is finding a room. Very hard to find schools with spare rooms. But we were lucky, we were able to do it, and I had the honor of George Lucas sending a team from Edutopia down to Brazil who did a little documentary on me and actually visited this, this facility, which unfortunately, since that time, the building was torn down because they moved the school. So I don't have my holodeck anymore. I've got to go build another one. We're trying to get them in the US and haven't got any takers yet, so if you know people who want one, you know, let's do it. And by the way, you want to do something less elaborate, this is from Steelcase Furniture. You take this particular furniture setup and you can have a bunch of kids sitting here with wireless devices and then others sitting in here, and you can do 3 screens at the front and then put a canopy over it with speakers in the ceiling so that it's acoustically isolated, but you can still make noises in it, and it works very, very well. So if you don't have a whole room, but you've got spare room in a library, corner of a library, you can still do something like this. Not quite the same, but kind of the same. Other missions that we're doing. Paleontology. Question, did the small raptors go extinct or did they turn into birds? Okay? And we love asking questions that people don't know, because then kids can't just, these are Google-proof questions. You can't just look it up on Google and say, oh, I know the answer, right? Now, on that one, we have a time machine. And in the time machine, it starts out, and they're looking at a map of the Earth as it exists today. And as they go back in time, they see the continents merge back into Pangea, because in the Jurassic period, there was just one continent, okay? And so they get to see that process, and then if they're looking out the front and a big dinosaur comes by, all they see is the big, you know, the leg pretty much blocking things. They can't see the animal. And we've designed, I haven't built it yet, I built one many years ago, a smell generator. And basically using scented oils and resistive elements and an Arduino, we can generate 256 different smells. Now, anybody want to hazard a guess as to what a forest smelled like when it was filled with dinosaurs? Not really good, right? And so we have tested out some of those smells and decided to put that mission on hold for a while. But I still think it's a good idea. Another one that I think is great fun, and you don't even need the holodeck to do this one, is the Kepler Space Telescope has identified about 50 planets that are Goldilocks planets. Not too hot, not too cold. They have water on them. Could support life. Not too big, not too small, right? Just right for life. Now, we decide to go visit one of these planets. We start to intercept signals from it. We have to decide, is this random or is it a real coded signal? That's a project for the kids to do, right? And then, next question, do you want to let the creatures on that planet know that we're in the neighborhood? Right? Now, that's an interesting question. And this is all before you get there. Now, that's a semester-long project, that one that we're working on. And we got history teachers involved. We got lots of people involved with that. On that topic of letting other people know where we are, Seth Shostak, who is one of the researchers at SETI, I used to be on SETI's board, that's Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, tells a story about Carl Sagan's wife did the pictures on the Pioneer spacecraft of the man and the woman that are there, and then there's a quasar map showing where the Earth is. And the man is shown standing like this to show that he's got 5 fingers. And the point that Seth makes is that there are societies on Earth for which this is a sign of aggression. And basically what we could be saying is, up yours, and if you don't like it, here's a map, come get us. Okay? He said our saving grace is that they look at the map and think that we look like sea urchins, and that this is the map. So, but it's interesting thought. But these are the kinds of questions, things we can do once we understand the role of place. The traditional full frontal lecture-based classroom by itself, it's impossible to do this. It's impossible to do this. But you can make changes, and you can help your teachers that you're working with make changes in their own schools, and their leaders. How many of you teach principals? You're doing programs for principals. You know, get them involved and say, look, you know, you got a new school budget. Are you bringing in some people who actually understand the role of place in education? There's a book called The Third Teacher that's all about that topic, okay? And then, of course, From the Campfire to the Holodeck, highly recommend it. By the way, buy 2 because they do make nice gifts. Just playing with you there. Okay, so with that, I will give you my email address. The way to get fast responses from me is to say site conference in the subject line, and then your question, because that'll automatically get kicked up to the top of my list. Okay, so I get about 300 emails a day, and I do get through them all, but I'll get to yours fast, I promise. And then we've got a blog, thornburgthoughts.wordpress.com, where we talk about a bunch of different stuff. Invite you to go there and look around. And with that, I thank you so much, and we're going to have a 15-minute break and then just hanging out time here for another hour. Okay? Thank you.